The following is a first-person account of Detective Sergeant Nora Voss, Homicide Division, Portland Police Bureau, regarding the investigation of a serial homicide case spanning 14 months. The case file is closed. The perpetrator is deceased. This account was written at the request of the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission for use in training materials. Names of victims have been used with the permission of their families. I've been a homicide detective for 11 years, and the one thing I can tell you with certainty is that there is no such thing as a routine call. Every time dispatch rings at 2 in the morning, something in your chest does something involuntary. Your body never quite adjusts to the knowledge that a voice on a radio means someone's life ended badly, and now it's yours to understand. The call came in on a Tuesday, October 14th. A jogger had found a woman's body in the greenbelt along the east bank of the Willamette in a narrow strip of trees between the river path and a residential street. I got there at 2:47 a.m. My partner at the time, a man named Garrett Hale, who I've worked with for 6 years and trust absolutely, got there 3 minutes after me. I remember standing at the edge of the tree line, looking at the scene before I walked into it, the way I always do. You get one chance to see it fresh before your own footprints are in the dirt and your own presence has changed the air. I used that one chance. The victim was a woman in her early 30s, brown hair. She was lying on her back, which is not the position bodies usually end up in. Gravity and physics tend to drop people on their sides or their fronts. She had been arranged, that was the first thing. Arms at her sides, legs together. The precise, deliberate posture of someone laid out for viewing, the posture of the formal dead. She was fully clothed, no obvious signs of sexual assault, though the autopsy would confirm. No visible wounds at first look, which was unusual. Cause of death was not immediately apparent. What was immediately apparent was that she was clean. Her clothes were clean, her hair was clean, her face was clean. We were outdoors, in a damp, wooded area at 3 in the morning, and this woman looked like she had been freshly bathed and dressed. I crouched down about 4 feet from her. I looked at her face for a long time. She looked peaceful. That's the word I kept coming back to. Not the brutal peace of the long dead, not the emptied look. She looked peaceful in the way a sleeping person looks peaceful, like she had closed her eyes by choice. "Garrett?" I said. "Yeah," he said. He was standing a few feet behind me. "This isn't where she died." "No. Somewhere else, cleaned up, brought here." "Yeah." "He wanted her found. He placed her on the path," Garrett said. "Not in the bushes, not concealed. He put her where a jogger would find her by 7 a.m. I stood up. I looked around the tree line for cameras. There were none at that angle. The residential security cameras on the houses beyond the trees had no sight line to this spot. He'd known that. He'd chosen this spot knowing that. "He's done this before," I said, not a question. Garrett didn't answer, which was his way of agreeing. The victim was identified the following day as Claire Marsh, 31 years old, a graphic designer who lived alone in southeast Portland. She had last been seen leaving work at 6:15 p.m. the previous day. Cause of death, according to the medical examiner, was asphyxiation, manual strangulation, consistent with large hands, bare hands, no glove marks, but no usable fingerprints either. She had been cleaned thoroughly after death with a commercial soap. The medical examiner found trace amounts of lavender, a lavender-scented soap, probably purchased anywhere. She had not been sexually assaulted. Her personal belongings, wallet, phone, keys, were missing. Her car was found 2 days later in a shopping center parking lot near her office, locked, everything inside. No witnesses, no DNA, a clean scene, almost aggressively clean. I sat at my desk the day after the autopsy and thought about what I knew. I thought about the arrangement of the body, the cleaning, the placement where she'd be found, and I thought, this person wanted me to see her.
He didn't hide her because hiding her wasn't the point. He wanted her seen. He wanted someone to look at what he'd done and understand it as a composition, a finished thing. I thought, this man thinks of himself as an artist. That was the beginning.
I want to be honest about something. Claire Marsh was not the first. She was the first one I caught, but she wasn't the first. 6 weeks after Claire's body was found, I was reviewing missing persons cases as part of the standard background work when I found Rebecca Cho, 47 years old, reported missing by her husband 8 months before Claire, in February of that year. Never found. Rebecca Cho was a nurse. She worked at OHSU. She had driven to work on a Monday morning, parked in her usual spot in the employee lot, and had never reached the building. Her car was locked, her badge was still in her bag in the car, no body. So no investigation in the sense that mine was an investigation, a missing persons case that had gone cold within weeks. I pulled her photo and I sat with it. Then, 3 weeks after that, working backwards through the data, I found Teresa Mullen, 62 years old, a retired school teacher. She had been found in a city park in the suburb of Lake Oswego in April. 2 months after Rebecca Cho had gone missing, 6 months before Claire Marsh. The Lake Oswego case had been handled by a different jurisdiction. The detective there had treated it as an isolated incident, the work of a person or persons unknown. No leads. The case went cold. But I read the report. Body arranged on its back, arms at its sides, fully clothed, evidence of post-mortem cleaning, cause of death, asphyxiation. I called the Lake Oswego detective. His name was Caruso. He'd been with their department for 20 years. When I described Claire Marsh's case to him, there was a silence on the phone that told me everything. "I've been waiting for this call," he said. I drove to Lake Oswego the next day. We sat in a conference room, we spread the files between us, and we looked at what we had. 2 confirmed murders with an identical method, 1 missing woman who fit a pattern we were just beginning to understand, and the terrible dawning arithmetic of a case that had been moving while nobody was watching. "He's been at this a while," Caruso said. "A long while. And he's escalating." 6 months between Teresa Mullen and Claire Marsh. If he holds to that trajectory, he won't, Caruso said. He was right. He wouldn't. We formed a task force in December. 4 detectives from Portland, 1 from Lake Oswego, a forensic psychologist named Dr. Alan Fenn from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. He flew in from Quantico, stayed in a hotel downtown, ate room service every night, and was, in spite of or because of this, excellent at his job. We called the unknown subject PROV, short for provisional, because you have to call them something, and you are never, under any circumstances, supposed to use the names the media gives these people. The names is what they want. Giving them what they want is a corruption of the investigation in ways both practical and psychological. So, Prov. What did we know about Prov? We knew he was strong. The medical examiner's assessment of the strangulation, the force involved, the hand size, was consistent with a large, physically capable adult male, almost certainly over 6 feet tall, almost certainly strong enough to subdue a woman without significant struggle. Neither Claire Marsh nor Teresa Mullen had defensive wounds. They hadn't fought. Whether that was because they couldn't or because they didn't have the opportunity, we couldn't say. We knew he was organized. The cleaning of the bodies demonstrated not just premeditation, but process, a consistent, methodical cleaning that took time, required supplies, and left no trace. He had a location where he did this, a private location, with water, with privacy, with enough control of the environment to spend the necessary time on a body without risk of interruption. We knew he was patient. If Rebecca Cho was his second victim, between Teresa Mullen and Claire Marsh, then he had taken someone who hadn't been found. That suggested he had disposal options for victims he chose not to display. The ones he displayed were displayed deliberately. The ones he didn't, either he was practicing in the early days, or Rebecca Cho was a departure, or there were others we hadn't found yet. We knew he selected women who lived alone or who had a predictable period of solitude. Claire Marsh lived alone. Teresa Mullen, a widow, lived alone. Rebecca Cho lived with her husband, but her husband worked night shifts twice a week, and Rebecca disappeared on one of those nights. He watched them first. Then he learned their schedules. He was patient enough to surveil, to wait for the right conditions. Patient, careful, controlled. Dr. Fenn, in one of our early briefings, said something I've never forgotten. He said, "The organization and the presentation tell you the same thing. This is someone who has a very specific internal logic. The cleaning is not about evidence. It's too thorough to be purely instrumental, and it doesn't serve a purely practical function since he's leaving the bodies to be found anyway. The cleaning is about something else. The presentation, peaceful, clean, arranged, that's someone who wants the death to look like a gift." The room was quiet. I said, "He doesn't think he's doing something wrong." Fenn said, "He has a moral framework in which what he's doing is justified. That makes him very dangerous. And it makes him potentially very readable, because people with internal logic leave traces of that logic everywhere."
She was found on January 9th. Her name was Andrea Lowell, 28 years old, a barista, a part-time student. She lived with a roommate who had been visiting family in California for the holidays. The roommate had come home 2 days before and found the apartment empty. Andrea's car was still in the lot. He assumed she was staying with friends. On January 9th, a Tuesday, a maintenance worker found her in the courtyard of a condominium complex in the Pearl District. Arranged, cleaned, peaceful. The gap between Claire Marsh and Andrea Lowell was 12 weeks. Compared to the 6 months between Teresa Mullen and Claire Marsh, this was nearly twice the pace. He was accelerating. I stood over Andrea Lowell's body in the gray January morning and felt something I try very hard not to feel in this job, because it interferes with thinking. I felt rage. Not visibly, not at the scene, but underneath the professional detachment. Hot, animal, entirely useless. Rage at whoever had done this. Rage at the terrible, accelerating mathematics of the situation. The knowledge that somewhere in this city there was a man moving through women's lives and leaving them arranged on the ground. And we didn't have his name, didn't have his face, barely had the outline of his shape. I went back to the office. I stayed until 11 that night. Then I went home and sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water and did something I rarely do. I allowed myself to be afraid. Allowed the fear in all the way. Felt it fully. Because sometimes you have to. You have to let it in, experience it, then put it away again and go back to thinking. I thought about Andrea Lowell, about what Fenn had said, that the arrangement and the cleaning were a statement, that he believed what he was doing was a gift. I thought, a gift requires a recipient. The gift has to be given to someone. The victims, Fenn had said, he might be making a statement to the victims. But the victims were dead. The gift was being given to people who couldn't receive it. Unless he knew them. That was the thought that arrived at 11:47 p.m. at my kitchen table. Not just surveilled them from a distance, actually knew them,
or believed he knew them. The intimacy of the arrangement, the care of the cleaning, the peace of the presentation, these were the gestures of someone who believed himself to have a relationship with the person he was presenting. He chose women who were, in some sense, alone, isolated, people who had gaps in their support structure, gaps in their visibility. He knew those gaps because he had watched them, but also because he saw something in them that he recognized, some quality of aloneness that he responded to. He was lonely too. I went to bed at 1 in the morning. I got up at 5 and went back to the office. The letter arrived on January 19th, addressed to me specifically at the Portland Police Bureau. My name, my rank, the bureau address, typed on a standard inkjet printer, mailed from a mailbox in Beaverton, which told us nothing useful. I read it with gloved hands, knowing already there would be no DNA, no fingerprints, because this person did not make those kinds of mistakes. It said, "Detective Voss, I've been reading the coverage. The journalists don't understand what I'm doing. I thought you might. You have been careful and respectful with the women you found, and I appreciate that. They deserve respect. That is the entire point. I want you to know that they were not afraid. I need you to know that. When the moment came, none of them were afraid. I made sure of that. There is a particular quality to a person when fear leaves them, a lightness, an opening. The last thing they felt was that lightness. I know you are trying to find me. I understand that is your job. I don't hold it against you. I think you should keep trying. I think the effort honors them. I will write again." No signature, no name. I read it 4 times. Then I put it in an evidence bag. Then I called Fenn. He drove to the bureau from his hotel in 20 minutes. He sat across from me and read the letter twice, then put it down and stared at the ceiling. "He's not taunting you," he said. "I know," I replied. "This isn't the Zodiac. It's not ego. It's not a power display. He means this." Fenn tapped the letter. He genuinely believes the women didn't suffer. He may even be right. There are methods of asphyxiation that can be fast and relatively peaceful if the victim doesn't struggle. And the absence of defense wounds suggests they didn't struggle, which suggests either incapacitation or a level of compliance. "Compliance," I interrupted. "He's grooming them." Fenn stopped, looked at me. "He knows them. We talked about this. He doesn't just watch them. He has contact. He establishes something, a relationship, or the appearance of one. He's someone they trust enough not to fight." "That changes everything," Fenn said quietly. "He's not a stranger. Not to them." I looked back at the letter. "I know you are trying to find me. I understand that is your job." He's in their lives. Peripherally, maybe, but in their lives. We need to look at social overlap, anyone who appears in more than one victim's orbit. We looked, for 3 weeks, at everything. Employers, service providers, gyms, coffee shops, medical providers, neighbors, social media followers. We built a web of overlapping contacts and tried to find the thread. And eventually, we found 2 overlaps.
Both victims, Claire Marsh and Teresa Mullen, had used the same pharmacy chain, different locations, and both had, in the months before their deaths, joined an online community forum for people dealing with isolation and depression, a Reddit-adjacent platform called Quiet Space, a place where people posted anonymously about loneliness, grief, and the difficulty of living alone. Andrea Lowell had a Quiet Space account too. Rebecca Cho had a Quiet Space account. I sat with that for a long time. Then I created an account and started reading.
The platform was exactly what it claimed to be, a quiet place for people to talk about the experience of being alone. Not a crisis platform, not therapy, just a space. Most of it was genuinely sad in the way ordinary human sadness is sad, the inarticulate grief of people who didn't have enough connection and were trying to put it into words. I read through hundreds of posts. I was looking for a pattern, a user who appeared consistently in the comments of the victims' posts, a voice that matched the voice in the letter. The victims' posts were heartbreaking. Claire Marsh had posted 4 times in the 8 months before her death. She wrote about the difficulty of living alone after a long relationship ended. Her username was CMPDX. Her posts were articulate, honest, sad. I read them 3 times each. Someone named Listener 1967 had replied to all 4. Listener 1967 had replied to all 4 of Claire's posts, all 3 of Teresa Mullen's posts, and 5 posts from a user I later confirmed was Rebecca Cho. The replies were gentle, thoughtful, empathetic. They were the kind of replies that made you feel heard. That was the word that kept occurring to me. Heard. He was a good listener, or he performed being one perfectly. The women had responded to him in return, grateful, warmer in later posts, sometimes mentioning they had been in contact with someone who understood, that they felt less alone. I showed everything to Fen. He read the threads carefully. When he looked up, his face had that grim, focused expression I'd learned to recognize. He establishes intimacy online, Fen said. Then he moves the relationship offline. That's when he's assessing, seeing whether they match what he's idealized. The ones who do, he stopped. Gives his gift, I said. Yes. We need to subpoena the platform's records, IP addresses, account information, everything. He's using a VPN, Fen said. Maybe Tor. He's too careful not to be. Maybe. But maybe he made a mistake somewhere. Careful people get comfortable. Comfortable people get careless. Garrett and I worked the subpoena for 5 days. The platform's legal team cooperated once we explained the nature of the investigation. They gave us everything they had. Listener 1967 had registered from a VPN server in the Netherlands, exactly what we'd expected. The account was 3 years old. Over that time, he had replied to more than 200 posts, dozens of users. We started looking at those users, trying to identify other possible victims, cross-referencing usernames with missing persons cases and unresolved homicides throughout the Pacific Northwest. It was slow work, painful work. And then we found 2 more. A woman in Seattle who had disappeared 2 years ago and never been found, and a woman in Eugene whose death had originally been ruled a cardiac event, but whose case file contained anomalies that had never been fully pursued. I called the medical examiner in Eugene. She reopened the file, looked at it again with fresh eyes. She called me back the next day. This was manual strangulation, consistent with what you described. I think it was missed because of her age. She was 54. She had hypertension, and the body had been outside long enough that some of the bruising degraded. When? I asked. January, 2 years ago. I wrote it on the board. 6 victims that we knew of, spanning at least 2 years, probably more. Some not found, some never connected. He had been doing this for a long time. The second letter arrived on February 3rd. It read, Detective Voss, I've been thinking about how to explain it to you. I want you to understand, because I think understanding is possible, and because I respect what you're doing, even if it ends badly for me. I see them before I find them. I mean this literally. I read what they write, and I can see them so clearly, the particular quality of their aloneness, the way they carry it. There is a kind of person who has been alone so long they've started to become transparent. You can see through them to something essential underneath. I find that beautiful. When I meet them, it's never what I expect. They're both more and less than the writing.
Real people always are. But there's always that quality, the transparency, the essential thing underneath. I'm drawn to it. I know what you're thinking. I know you found the platform. I changed accounts the day you found it. I'm telling you this not to gloat, but because I want the account to exist. I want the writing to still be there. The writing is all I have left of them. There will be another on Tuesday. I sat in the task force room at 7 in the morning, staring at the letter. A man was telling me he would kill again in 5 days, and I still couldn't find him. But one line stayed with me. The writing is all I have left of them. He grieved them afterward. He believed he was giving them a gift, and then he missed them. The loss drove him forward, toward the next victim, toward the next connection. He isn't a predator in the traditional sense, Fenn said during that afternoon's briefing. He's not motivated by power or domination. His motivation is connection. He wants intimacy. The killing is his version of the deepest possible connection. He believes he's giving them a gift, but afterward they're gone, and he experiences loss, and that loss drives the need for the next connection. He's grief-driven, I said. He's lonely, Fenn replied, in a way that has become pathological, and he's been lonely for a long time. Long enough that the only intimacy he can imagine is the one he's invented.
"Can we use that?" Garrett asked. Fenn looked at him. "Possibly. If we can establish contact?" "He's already established contact," I said. "The letters. He wants contact. He wants me to understand him." "Yes," Fenn said carefully. "So I write back." The room went quiet. "A public statement," I continued, "not a letter. That would go to a P.O. box he probably doesn't even check. A dead end. A press statement. Something he'll see. Directed at him." We worked on the statement for 2 days. It had to walk a careful line. We acknowledged the letters without revealing operational details. We used Fenn's language, understanding, connection, listening. The goal was simple. Make him believe I heard him. Make him want to talk. The statement read, "I have read your letters carefully. I want to understand what you're telling me. I believe you're trying to say something important, and I am listening." We released it through the media on February 5th. 3 days later, on February 8th, a Tuesday, a woman was found in northeast Portland. She was lying in a pocket park 2 blocks from her house, arranged, cleaned, peaceful. Her name was Susan Farley, 41 years old, an accountant. She had a Quiet Space account. My statement had not worked. Or maybe it had worked, maybe it moved him to write again, but it hadn't stopped him, because stopping was never part of his framework. People who believe they're doing good don't stop doing good. I stood over Susan Farley's body at 8 in the morning. The February air cut through my coat, and I made myself look at her for a long time, every detail, every line of her face, because she deserved to be seen, and because I owed her that much. Then I went back to work. The break in the case didn't come from brilliant detective work. I want to be honest about that. The mythology of investigations is mostly fiction. People imagine a lone detective having a sudden flash of insight, a eureka moment, a genius connecting impossible dots. Most of the time, it doesn't happen that way. The break came from tedious cross-referencing, a forensic accountant borrowed from financial crimes, and a 54-year-old pharmacy manager named Dora Hayashi. The pharmacy connection had never gone away. Claire Marsh and Teresa Mullen had both used the same pharmacy chain. When we expanded the search to include Rebecca Cho, Andrea Lowell, and Susan Farley, all 5 women had prescriptions filled through branches of the same regional company. The chain employed 312 people across 15 locations. We started looking for employees who moved between stores, people with access to customer information across multiple branches. There were 11. Delivery drivers, district managers, IT support staff. One of them stood out.
Not because of anything dramatic, because of a minor arrest 15 years earlier. Criminal harassment, following a woman, sending unwanted communications. The charge had been reduced. He completed probation and counseling. The case disappeared into the past. His name was Martin Aldridge, 47 years old. He had worked for the pharmacy company for 12 years, an IT support technician. That position gave him access to every store's system, every customer profile, names, addresses, prescription histories, medical information, the intimate inventory of a person's life. Dora Hayashi mentioned him while we interviewed pharmacy employees. We asked whether any staff member had ever made her uncomfortable. She hesitated, said she didn't want to get anyone in trouble. Then she mentioned Martin. She said he was always professional, always polite, but whenever he worked in her store, she noticed something. He lingered over customer profiles, longer than necessary, looking at the information with a strange level of attention, a focus she couldn't quite explain, but one that made her uneasy. I looked deeper into Martin Aldridge. He lived alone, had lived alone for 12 straight years. He was 6'2". He had no social media presence under his real name. I obtained a warrant for his internet records. The account used by listener 1967 had been created through a VPN, just as we'd expected, but the VPN itself had to be paid for, and after weeks of legal requests and FBI assistance, we finally obtained those records. The VPN account had been purchased using a credit card, registered to Martin J. Aldridge, Northeast Portland, his own credit card. He had hidden behind layers of anonymity for years and then made the simplest mistake possible. Careful people get comfortable. Comfortable people get careless. I stood in the task force room at 10 o'clock that night. The evidence spread across the table. 11 months of work, hundreds of hours, 6 dead women, and finally, a name, a real name. I looked at Garrett. We have him. Garrett nodded. We have him.
The search warrant for Martin Aldridge's house on Northeast Skidmore was executed at 6 in the morning on March 17th. I was there. I insisted on being there. Garrett argued with me about it and lost. The house was a modest craftsman bungalow, well maintained, completely unremarkable. The kind of house on the kind of street where nobody really knows their neighbors. His car was in the driveway. He was home. He answered the door wearing pajamas and slippers. A tall, thin man, neat gray beard, wire-rimmed glasses, and eyes I will think about for the rest of my life. Pale gray, completely calm. Not the calm of someone hiding panic, not the performance of control. Actual calm. The calm of a man who had always known this morning might come and had already made peace with it. "Detective Voss," he said, looking directly at me. He had seen my photograph in the news. He knew exactly who I was. "Martin Aldridge," I said. "You're under arrest." He nodded, raised his hands, and surrendered without resistance. No argument, no attempt to run, no anger, no fear. From the first moment to the last, he was entirely cooperative. While the arrest team processed him, the rest of us searched the house. The main floor was painfully ordinary. A neat living room, a bookshelf filled with paperback novels, a kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee, a small office, a computer, a printer, the same printer model that matched the letters he'd mailed. Nothing dramatic, nothing that screamed monster, just an ordinary home. Then we found the basement. I went downstairs after the initial sweep confirmed it was secure. The stairs were narrow. The basement had been finished years earlier, and it had been designed for a purpose. A large utility sink, a stainless steel work table, shelves lined with medical-grade cleaning supplies, everything organized with the precision of a laboratory or a hospital. Nothing was out of place, nothing was random. Every item had a location. Every location had a purpose. A folding table stood near one wall. On it sat a high-end portable speaker. Later, we would learn he played classical music while he worked. Mozart, Beethoven, Bach. Music filled the room while he cleaned the bodies. And then I saw the wall. Photographs, dozens of them. Not photographs of the women after death, photographs of them while they were alive. Social media images, quiet space profile photos, security camera stills, pictures gathered during surveillance, all carefully arranged like an art gallery. Each photograph had a handwritten card beneath it, a single word, a single quality he believed defined them. Claire Marsh, luminous. Teresa Mullen, dignified. Rebecca Cho, radiant. Andrea Lowell, tender. Susan Farley, serene. I stood there for a long time, looking at those faces, looking at those words, thinking about the letters. There is a kind of person who has been alone so long they've started to become transparent. You can see through them to something essential underneath. I find that beautiful. He had looked at lonely women, women who felt isolated, women who wrote openly about pain on an anonymous forum, and he believed he had discovered something beautiful inside them, something pure, something worth preserving. And in the closed logic of his particular madness, he decided preservation meant stopping time, fixing them in place forever. He believed he loved them. I want to be clear about something. That belief changes nothing. It doesn't lessen what happened. It doesn't reduce the horror. 6 women were dead, 6 futures erased, 6 families broken. The nature of his delusion is not an excuse, but understanding matters, because understanding is the job. Behind the gallery wall was a fireproof safe. We opened it under court authorization. Inside were 12 notebooks, 12, handwritten, carefully organized, dating back 7 years. At first, I assumed they belonged to the victims. I was wrong. Most of the women inside those notebooks had never been harmed. Each notebook focused on a different woman, women from quiet space, women he had followed, written to, observed, considered. Hundreds of pages, hundreds of women, 7 years of watching, 7 years of studying strangers, 7 years of deciding who fit the image in his head. Only 6 of those women became victims. The rest were spared. Why? I never fully understood. Maybe they failed to meet his standard. Maybe circumstances changed. Maybe reality interrupted the fantasy before it could become action. Whatever the reason, the notebooks revealed something important. The murders had not created the obsession. The obsession had existed long before the murders. For 7 years, he had been managing it, containing it, suppressing it, and eventually the containment failed. The gaps between victims grew shorter. The pace accelerated. The fantasy demanded more and more and more. Standing in that basement, surrounded by photographs and notebooks and evidence of years of fixation, I realized something. We hadn't discovered a killer's workshop. We had discovered a shrine, a monument built by a man who had mistaken obsession for love and loneliness for understanding.
I interviewed Martin Aldridge twice. Both interviews were conducted with legal counsel present. The first was mostly procedural. The second was different. The second interview was where I finally understood who I was talking to. Martin Aldridge had a flat affect, perfect manners, and a quality of attention I imagine very good therapists possess. The full, undivided presence of someone genuinely interested in what you have to say. When I entered the interview room, he looked at me the way most people wish to be looked at. Like I was interesting, like my thoughts mattered, like I was worth listening to. I had to remind myself, consciously, to account for that.
not to trust the feeling, not to mistake attention for empathy. He talked about the women with warmth, with care. He used their first names. He remembered specific things they had written years earlier, quoted them from memory, perfectly, as though every word had been carved into him. Twice during the interview he cried, quietly, not dramatically, not for sympathy, the tears of someone who genuinely believed he had lost something precious. "Do you understand what you did to them?" I asked. "I ended their lives," he said. "I understand that the law considers that to be the central fact." I stared at him. "What do you consider to be the central fact?" He thought for a moment, then answered, "What I gave them." At the end, "What did you give them?" "Peace." His voice was calm, certain. The experience of being completely seen, and then peace. "How do you know they wanted that from you?" "Because they wrote about wanting it. Not in those exact words, but that's what they were reaching for. Connection, to be seen, to matter to someone. I saw them. I made them matter." "By killing them?" I asked. "By preserving them." The way he said it made my skin crawl. Gentle, soft, completely sincere. Before the world did what the world does. Before loneliness finished what it had started. I looked at him across the table, at the man who had spent years constructing an entire universe inside his head, a universe where murder was compassion, where obsession was love, where violence was mercy. "Martin," I said, "Claire Marsh had a sister in Eugene." He looked at me. "She called Claire every Sunday." His expression didn't change. So I continued. "Teresa Mullen had grandchildren. They visited her twice a year. They loved her. She wasn't alone. Neither of them were. None of them were." He sat quietly, listening. For the first time since the interview began, something shifted in his face. A tiny movement, barely noticeable, but it was there. A crack. The smallest crack. "I didn't know about the sister," he said quietly. "Because you looked at them from the outside," I replied. "You read what they wrote when they felt lonely, and you decided you knew the whole person. But you only knew the parts they chose to share. You missed everything else." The room became silent for a long time. Then he spoke. "I missed everything else." His voice sounded different now, not defeated, not remorseful, just uncertain, like a man discovering a flaw in a foundation he thought was solid. I don't know exactly what he was thinking, but I know that moment mattered, because afterward something changed. Over the following weeks, his attorney reported a shift in his behavior. He became more cooperative, more willing to discuss details, more willing to help us locate evidence. Most importantly, he helped us find Rebecca Cho. Rebecca had been buried on a property in the Columbia Gorge, land he had access to through a hiking club, a remote area where he had spent years walking alone. Her family had spent almost a year wondering, almost a year hoping, almost a year without answers. Because of his cooperation, they finally got those answers. I don't believe he suddenly developed complete remorse. I don't believe people transform that quickly. But I think something inside his framework broke. A little. The idea that he had truly seen these women, truly understood them, that belief had supported everything. And suddenly there was evidence that he hadn't understood them at all. He missed the sister, missed the grandchildren, missed the Sunday phone calls, missed entire pieces of their lives. And if he missed those things, what else had he missed? The whole structure of his self-justification depended on the belief that he knew them better than anyone else. Now that belief had a crack running through it. It wasn't enough. Nothing could ever be enough. 6 women were still gone. That reality wouldn't change. But Rebecca Cho's family finally got able to bury her. And that meant something. Sometimes in this job, meaning arrives in very small pieces, and you learn to take what you can get. Martin Aldridge pleaded guilty to 6 counts of first-degree murder in October, 14 months after Claire Marsh's body was found beside the river path. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He was transferred to a state correctional facility in eastern Oregon. I don't know if he's still writing. I don't let myself know. The victims' families, I've stayed in contact with most of them. That's not unusual in homicide work. You become part of the history of their grief, whether you intend to or not. Claire Marsh's sister calls me every October 14th, the anniversary. We talk for 20 minutes, sometimes longer. She tells me how she's doing. She tells me stories about Claire. Not the sad stories, the living stories, the funny ones, the human ones. I listen, and afterward I write them down. I don't know exactly why. Maybe because Martin Aldridge kept notebooks, and maybe the impulse to record the people we lose isn't entirely his pathology. Maybe it's just human. Teresa Mullen's granddaughter sent me a card after graduating from nursing school. The card said, "I became a nurse partly because of how people talked about my grandmother. They said she helped people. They said she was good at it. I wanted to do that too." I kept the card. Garrett and I are still partners. 6 days after Aldridge's arrest, another case came in. A man found in an alley in Old Town. Suspicious circumstances. The work continued, because it always continues. The phone rings at 2 in the morning. Something inside your chest reacts before your mind catches up. You get dressed, you get in the car, and you go. That's the job. I knew that when I took it. I know it differently now. I still think about Martin Aldridge sometimes. Not often, less than I used to. Mostly, I think about something Dr. Fenn said after the arrest. We were sitting in the empty task force room. The photographs were still pinned to the boards. The timelines still stretched across the walls. Red strings connecting names and places and dates. The whole terrible map of the case. Fenn looked around the room and said, "The frightening thing about this kind of offender isn't the violence. The violence is the outcome. The frightening thing is the logic, the internal consistency. He built a world in which he was the hero, the one who saw these women when nobody else would, the one who cared. That world was completely real to him, completely coherent." "How do you fight a coherent delusion?" I asked. "You introduce reality," Fenn said, "as specifically as possible. The sister who called every Sunday, the grandchildren who visited. You make the real person visible, because delusions feed on abstraction. He loved an abstraction. When the real person appears," Fenn gestured toward the board, "sometimes the whole structure trembles." I thought about that for a long time, the difference between seeing someone and believing you see them. The violence hidden inside certainty, the danger of assuming you understand another person completely. Martin Aldridge sat in a basement for years, surrounded by photographs, surrounded by fantasies, convinced he was the only person who truly understood these women. And yet he missed the sister, the grandchildren, the Sunday phone calls, the ordinary details that make up a life. The pieces that matter most, the pieces that prove a person is more than their worst day, more than their loneliest thought, more than the pain they choose to write down. I thought about Claire Marsh's posts on Quiet Space. 4 posts, spread across 8 months, words written late at night, words written during difficult moments,
words written when loneliness felt heavy. Martin read those words and decided they were the whole story. He mistook a chapter for an entire book, and then he killed her. But Claire had a sister in Egan who called every Sunday. She wasn't as alone as her writing sometimes suggested. None of them were. They were people having difficult stretches, people carrying burdens, people trying to survive, people using writing the way humans have always used writing, to process pain, to release it, to keep moving. Their loneliness wasn't their identity. It was only one moment inside a much larger life. Martin couldn't see that. He took that future from them. He took the getting through. That's what stays with me. Not the killer, not the methods, not the evidence board, not the photographs. The getting through. 6 women were denied the chance to continue, denied the chance to heal, denied the chance to discover what came next. I think about that, and then I go to work. 11 years in homicide, 116 cases, 69 convictions, 14 cold cases I still think about. What do I know? I know that people who do terrible things rarely believe they're doing terrible things. They build stories, frameworks, explanations, narratives that make their actions seem reasonable, sometimes even noble. It would be easier if evil were obvious, if it announced itself, if it looked different from everyone else. But it doesn't. Martin Aldridge was polite, quiet, organized. He cried when he talked about women he murdered. He remembered their words years later, and he believed he loved them. I know loneliness is not a small thing. The victims gathered on a platform created for lonely people, and the man who found them there was damaged by the same thing that made them vulnerable. Loneliness changes people. Most of the time, the damage is survivable. Most of the time, people heal. Some reach out. Some find help. Some find connection. A very small number take a different path. The loneliness that broke Martin Aldridge began in the same place as the loneliness that made Claire Marsh write on Quiet Space. The difference wasn't the wound. The difference was everything that came afterward. I know this job asks more than it gives back, and I do it anyway, because someone has to stand in the cold at 3 in the morning. Someone has to look at what happened and commit to understanding it. That commitment isn't heroic. It isn't noble. It's simply the work. And I know that Claire Marsh had a sister in Egan who called every Sunday, that Teresa Mullen's granddaughter became a nurse, that Rebecca Cho's family finally brought her home, that even in the worst stories, there are still Sunday phone calls, graduation cards, family dinners, small human threads that hold people together. That's not nothing. That's the thing I hold on to. And after everything, it's enough.